The Whitmore house stood alone, a sentinel on the hill, grey and weathered. Its windows were dark eyes staring out at the world. The house had once been grand. Now it was a shell, a husk of its former self. The paint peeled, the roof sagged. The porch groaned under the weight of neglect. The garden was overgrown. Weeds choked the flower beds and thorns tore at the unwary. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of decay. The locals whispered about the house. They said it was haunted by the ghost of Margaret Whitmore. Margaret had been a beautiful woman, young and full of life. She had lived in the house with her husband, Edward. He was a cruel man, controlling and possessive. One night Margaret vanished, gone without a trace. Some said Edward had killed her. Others said she had run away. The truth was lost, buried with Margaret. Emma Reynolds was a folklore researcher. She was drawn to stories like Margaret's, stories of tragedy and mystery. She had read about the Whitmore house and felt a pull, a need to know the truth. Emma decided to rent the house. She would live there, experience it for herself. Maybe she could find out what happened to Margaret. Maybe she could help her find peace. Emma packed her bags, drove to the house and stood on the porch. She could feel the weight of the house's history. It pressed down on her like a shroud, The first night was the worst. The house creaked and groaned as if it were alive. Emma lay in bed unable to sleep. Then she heard it, a whisper, faint and far away. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. Emma sat up in bed, listening intently. The whisper came again. This time it was closer, clearer. Emma could almost make out words, but they were lost in the darkness. Emma got out of bed and walked towards the sound, towards the whispers. Her heart pounded in her chest. The whispers led Emma to the attic. The door was locked, but the wood was old, rotten. Emma kicked the door in. It burst open. The attic was dark and dusty. Cobwebs hung from every corner. The air was thick with the smell of decay. In the center of the room was a trunk, old and weathered. Emma knelt down beside the trunk. She lifted the lid. Inside she found a diary, bound in leather. The pages were yellowed with age. The ink faded. As Emma reached for the diary, she felt a cold breath on her neck. She turned around. There in the shadows she saw a figure, a woman dressed in white. Her face was pale. Her eyes were empty. Section 6. Uncovering the Past. Emma screamed. The figure vanished. Emma was alone. She sat there for a long time, trying to calm her racing heart. She knew she had to find out more about Margaret. She had to find out what happened to her. Emma left the house. She went to the local library. She began to research Margaret's life. She read old newspaper articles. She talked to the town's oldest residents. Slowly, she pieced together Margaret's story. Emma learned that Edward had been abusive. He had kept Margaret prisoner in the house. He had forbidden her from seeing her friends or family. He had been obsessed with her. Section 7. The Cemetery's Embrace. One day, Emma discovered an old map. It showed the location of the Whitmore family cemetery. It was on the outskirts of town, hidden in the woods. Emma went to the cemetery. She found Margaret's grave. The headstone was cracked, covered in moss. Emma knelt down before the grave. She closed her eyes. She could feel Margaret's presence. It was strong here, overwhelming. Emma knew what she had to do. She had to help Margaret find peace. She had to help her let go of the pain and anger that was keeping her spirit tethered to the house. Section 8. A Vigil for Margaret. That night, Emma returned to the attic. She lit a candle and placed it beside the diary. She sat down on the floor and began to read aloud. Emma read about Margaret's hopes and dreams. She read about her love for her family and friends. She read about her fear of Edward and her despair at being trapped in the house. As Emma read, she could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. The air grew colder, the shadows seemed to deepen, and the whispers grew louder. Section 9. Peace at last. Suddenly the candle flickered and then it went out. The room was plunged into darkness. Emma could hear the sound of sobbing, softly at first, then louder, anguished. A cold hand touched Emma's cheek. Emma didn't flinch. She knew it was Margaret. She spoke to her softly and gently. She told her that it was okay to let go, that she was safe now, that she was free. The sobbing subsided. The cold hand withdrew, and then there was silence, a deep, profound silence. Emma opened her eyes. The first rays of dawn were peeking through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was still, the shadows were gone, and the whispers were silent. Margaret was gone. Finally, at peace.